All right. Good morning, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today. I have an amazing guest with me. My wife and I saw Joe speak a year or two ago, and we were so enthralled by how much energy he brings, how much passion he brings. So if you are a parent this morning and you're watching and you're worried because your child, when they've gone into school years before, they've started to get anxious or nervous, maybe they have some social anxiety. Maybe they're popular, but there's so much peer pressure. There's so many things that kids are dealing with nowadays, and that's what we're going to cover this morning, is to give you guys some really a deeper understanding as well as some really practical strategies on how to really best support your kids this school year. So welcome, Joe. Very excited to have you this morning.
Dude, I am so excited to be having this conversation. Thank you for connecting me with your tribe.
Absolutely. I'm honored that my tribe can connect with you as well. So if you don't know Joe Beckman, he is an amazing guy. He's been doing this work for over 15 years. The cool thing is he's spoken to 1,500 schools. He's spoken internationally to over 1 million students. So that's a lot of connections you've made over the years, Joe. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And when you
hmm
take the step back and you look at the body of work, you're like, wow, it's been a long haul and a lot of
Yeah.
different ups and downs. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit
hmm
here. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, I bet you that is pretty phenomenal when you look back at all the lives you've touched and all the people you've impacted. So
Yeah, it's cool.
yeah, and the overall, one of Joe's main missions is to re-inspire and reclaim human connection. So I think when you have such a valuable mission like that, it is going to drive you. I know we were talking the other day. You said you get up at 4:30 in the morning because you got a big mission. You got a lot to accomplish today. You've got a family. You've got kids at home. So it's fun to be with you today. So tell us, let's get to know you a little bit better, Joe. And one thing that we've experienced with a lot of the families that we talk to anyway is as they're going through life, they're raising kids, there can be challenges and struggles. And sometimes we talk to a mom and they're like, oh, I wish I would have known this years ago. I wish I could go back and maybe make a change or do something different. However, in life, we also realize that sometimes those hardships can actually lead us to where we're at today. And I know you've been through some different things yourself. So can you share a bit on how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, so just a long story short, I'm the
Mm-hmm.
youngest of three kids in a very athletic-minded family. And so sports was my life growing up. Baseball, basketball, football, those were the three that I sort of excelled at. And I was doing a very good job of being that athlete and playing that role until ninth grade. And when I suffered a stress fracture to my lower back, and I was told that contact sports were no longer a possibility. And for me, sports was everything. And so I was kind of crushed and I was confused and I was lost. And I went through about 6 to 12 months of just those kind of dark times that I think a lot of kiddos struggle with. And in that time, I, made a lot of poor choices. I questioned a lot of different things about myself. I struggled with actually an eating disorder during that time as well, as I was just processing through what my next steps were going to be in high school. And it was my sophomore year, about a year after my injury, when our theater director was going around and trying to recruit more male actors for the upcoming musical. They had plenty of girls, but not enough guys. And I had always gone to plays with my mom as a kid, and I always loved it, but I never had an opportunity to be a part of any of them because I was always in sports. And so I thought, you know what, even though I've never had any theater experience, and even though my friends who are sport jocko guys are probably going to make fun of me, I'm going to give this a shot. And I tried out and I got a part. And the moment I stepped on that stage, I was like, oh dear Lord, this is where I need to be and where I
Wow.
always needed to be. And so I did theater and acting all the way through high school, even my senior year when the doctors kind of gave me the thumbs up that I could play sports again or football again. And I had to choose because I couldn't do both. I stuck with theater. And I did it all the way through high school. I did it all the way through college. And it's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I sort of was trying to do the actor thing, and I loved playing that role and being up on stage in front of people. But
Mm-hmm.
there was this part of me, too, that said, I want not just to read somebody else's words that they write down
Mm-hmm.
on a sheet of paper. I want to say my words that I'm writing down on a piece of paper. And so I've always had this ability to connect with kids, and I've had this passion to inspire and share messages with them. And so with my theater background and my passion for working with kids, I ran into an organization in Minneapolis called Youth Frontiers, and they go into schools and do day-long retreats. That's like games and music and small groups and talks. 12 years, I gave 2 15-minute talks every single day in schools all across the state and all across the region. And it was about 4 years ago where I started to get the itch to get out and do this on my own. And so I shifted and I transitioned away from the nonprofit that I was working at, and I created my own speaking brand and my own speaking business. And we're about 3.5, 4 years into this experiment, and yeah, going pretty well. So
awesome. That's amazing. That's fun to see, that it can actually, I think, if you're growing up with a sports family, you maybe go into sports by default, but then you find like, oh, wait a minute, this actually was my passion. This was what drew me out. So drew out your excitement.
Right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's been theater or art or something like that, and you might have on the opposite side, you might say, hey, I want to try out for this sport or this something else.
Right.
A lot of times we get pigeonholed into like, this is who we are and this is what we do at an early age, and we put ourselves in our own boxes, and it's hard to break out of those boxes. And so
definitely,
I think it's good advice.
Absolutely, especially with kids, because that's, you're going through transitions in life and you're trying to figure these things out. So that's the time in life when you are making those changes and really finding what is true to yourself. So just as a heads up, I'm talking about like things you could potentially do over. I know I'm outside here right now, and I was doing a test run this morning. The birds weren't out yet, so if you hear some chirping in the background, it's because since I did the test run,
I'm putting them in my head as hecklers. You're just kind of like
so
throw a curveball into the interview. So I'm welcoming the bird heckling right now.
Perfect. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering what the little noises are in the background, it's because when doing an interview outside, I realize environments change in the moment. I think the sun's even coming in different now than it was before. So
it's all good.
All right. So anyway, as we're approaching the new school year, what are some of the things that you see kids struggling with the most? Are there any common themes that cause the most stress, worry, anxiety?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we talk about kids these days, we assume that a lot of the stuff is different than what it was for you and me or for a generation before even us. And some things nuanced are completely different, but there are some things that are completely the same. I think the bigger sort of questions that kids are asking are some of the same questions you and I asked and a lot of the people watching this. And say those are kind of two major questions. Who am I and where do I fit in? And so if like those two questions generally are what I think are driving a lot of the behaviors and the choices, the worries and the stresses that kids go through. But at the end of the day, I think if we can somehow get a grasp and provide some answers to those two big questions, who am I and where do I fit in? I think we will alleviate a lot of those, not take away all the stresses and anxieties that's going to be there, I think, no matter what. But I think we provide a stronger foundation for the kiddos to work with. So one thing that I talk to parents about and to students about is getting super clear on like who you are and what you stand for. What are your values?
Right.
And when I'm working with students and teachers, I actually have them do an activity where they take 60 values and they kind of look at them, and by the end they get them down to like their top 3. And then we give them a card that they can write these values on, and we tell them to put it in a place where they're going to see it again, because life is busy, it's chaotic. There's lots of curveballs that get thrown our way on a daily basis. It can be really easy to forget what we stand for. And so this is kind of a cool activity that they get to kind of, really think deeply about, the person that they want to be and the person they are on the inside already.
Absolutely.
And it gives them a reminder and a tool just to, and from a practicality standpoint, what I say to students is you have tough choices that you have to make. These values are so incredibly important because it's as simple as going, does this choice bring me closer to those values or does it bring me further away?
Right.
And the more we make the choice that brings us further away from our values, the worse overall we feel. And the more we say yes to the choices that are in alignment with our values, the better we feel. And the hard part is that a lot of times those choices that are in value or in alignment with our values aren't the popular choice, or
Right.
aren't the choice that maybe is going to give you the most, like, in the moment, the pleasure that you're hoping to receive or whatever it may be. And so that's where the courage comes in, and having a
Definitely.
strong sense of self and purpose.
And
But
yeah,
yeah,
I can see that being huge with kids because it's such an influential time of life and you're figuring out who you are, but if you haven't identified that, it's so easy to see what the other kids are doing and just go along with the mainstream or the flow of everyone else. And if it's in violation to who you really are, your own values, you might not even know it, but you get home and you feel kind of off, or, it costs a lot of energy to go through the day. You're wiped out, you're exhausted, you're anxious, simply because you're not living in congruence with your own values.
yeah, that's it. And I think going back to your question of, like, what are some of the stresses that kids are feeling nowadays, like, particularly, I don't know if it's like any one major thing that most kids struggle with. I think it's a lot of little things, like you said,
Right.
add up. And so you make one choice that's not in alignment with your values, it's probably not going to ruin your life. But if you make lots of little choices that are not in alignment with your values, like you said, you get home and maybe you can't even put words to it, but you just kind of feel off. You
Right.
feel,
Yeah.
like something's missing. And I think it's a lot of those little choices that we make on a daily basis, and not just the big choices that are important, that matter.
Definitely. And is there an age when you start working with kids, or if a parent's at home and they're wondering, how to get their kids going, is there a certain age that you can start with values, or is it really young?
Dude, I
What?
to talk about it as a family. So I
Okay.
think the earlier the better, right? Obviously, you have nuance with how you approach it and how you're talking about it. But I have a 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and
Okay.
we have done this values activity as a family, and we've identified what we want our family to be known for and what we want to stand for. And through that process, we came up with a phrase called House of Joy. We want to be a house of joy, where people who are coming into our house or experiencing our family, they leave with more joy than they came with. And so what that does is it gives us an amazing opportunity every time, like, my youngest, who's 5, or even my 7-year-old, who's a little bit older, when they make choices that are that's not bringing joy to our house, or whatever, we can easily go back to that and say, hey, does that make our house, have more joy or less joy? And because we've
Okay.
established that common foundation and that common language, it's a really easy sort of talking point. And so, I mean, I don't think, even at the age of 5, is he grasping everything that we're talking about? Probably not.
Right.
But building blocks, and it's the seeds
Cool.
that we're planting. So I don't think, obviously, like 3, 2, probably not going to get a lot of values out of there, but by, pre-K or kindergarten, especially if they're the youngest of 3 and they have older brothers or sisters, I don't think it hurts to talk about this stuff early and often.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's such a great way to set up a foundation. And, kids are so intuitive and so they're so good at picking up their environment. So if they're noticing that's the standard for the house and that's what their siblings are doing or that's what their parents are doing, they're going to definitely follow suit. So, what about, I know we've talked before and you've mentioned there's certain things that all parents should know, especially there's going into any new school year. I remember when I was a kid, anytime the new school year would come up, I would be really anxious, really nervous. I was definitely someone who wasn't super social. So going into getting back together with all my classmates was always kind of nerve-wracking to see what happened over the summer. But especially those transition years, so maybe 6th grade going into middle school or junior high, or 9th grade going into high school, or even bigger because it's such a huge transition.
Yeah.
So what are some advice, tips that you feel every parent should know during those years?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that I would share with parents is, if you had anything you could bring to the table, it's empathy. And what I mean by that is, take 5 minutes and remind yourself of what it was like for you when you were in 6th grade or 9th grade or whatever grade. And just remember some of the struggles and the pain points and the fears and the worries that you had. And remember just how tough that was. And I think if you can engage in that sort of activity and remind yourself of some of that, you're going to be much more in tune with the fears and the anxieties and the stresses. facing. I think a lot of times as parents, we figure certain things out along the way and realize, you know what, that thing that I used to worry about wasn't really that big of a worry. And then we just assume that our kids aren't going to worry about that same thing because we figured it out. And then we push and we say, hey, that person who makes fun of you, just don't believe what they say. And it's like, that's great advice. But remember, when you were in 6th grade, if you heard that advice, you would still worry quite a bit about what they said. And so just remember what it's like to be in their shoes. And I would also say, if I were to give 2 tips, number 1, remember, be willing to get a little vulnerable. Be willing to go back and share some stories, cultivate some stories, what it was like for you in middle school or high school. What are some times when you knocked it out of the park and you did a great job of being in line with your values, or you made the right choice, or you stood up for that kid? That's helpful. But I think maybe even more importantly is sharing the times when you didn't get it right. Sharing the times where you felt flat and you said something that embarrassed you, or there's so many things when I look back, I sort of shudder in embarrassment over the things that I've said and done. But it's in those moments where we become human as adults and as parents, as teachers. So often kids put us on this pedestal, and it's kind of a nice pedestal for us to be on as parents because we're an authoritative figure. We should have that pedestal. But the further where they see us and where they see themselves, the less connection that we have. And when you're real and you're vulnerable and you're authentic and you're able to say, that reminds me of when I was with my group of friends, and you know what? I didn't really make a great choice in that situation. So I understand what you're going through. It just sort of levels the playing field. And at the end of the day, it's our humanness, not our perfection or intelligence, that's going to have the biggest impact on young people.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think as adults we have new, as you go through life, you have new levels of problems, right? So as adults, we have bills to pay and a job and a house and a family to manage. So like with the first tip that you said, I think it's easy to overlook what stresses we were under when we were a kid. Because I think whatever point in life you are, the stresses you're under, if they're new, they're the biggest stress you've ever had. So as an adult, we say, oh, now we have real problems because we're adults. But really, as a kid, they were real problems too. We just learned how to get over them. So I love that first tip of go back to when you were that age. What were you going through? And then I think that ties so easily into the second tip, because then you can actually feel like, oh, that's right, it was a big deal what shoes I wore, or what my shirt, if it was the popular shirt or not, or what my haircut was. All those things are a big deal when you're a kid.
Who's I going to go to the first football game with? And or those like homecoming dances and things like that, like all of that. For instance, my daughter is in a play tonight. She's been rehearsing for the last 3 weeks. And I sent her a message this morning, and I would have easily forgotten about it if I didn't kind of like go back and remember what it was like for me. But being in theater ever since high school, I put myself in, her shoes, and I tried to really like think about what was it like for me that opening night of the show. And I would be so excited. I remember how anxious and nervous I was. And so instead of just, going through the normal A plus B equals C of my day, I took time just send her a quick little message and just say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. It's a big day. You've worked really, really hard for this. And I just really want you to enjoy it. And whether or not I had the perfect words or said the perfect thing, I just think the acknowledgement and just going, hey, I remember that feeling. And it's and not just the tough stuff, but the great stuff and the celebratory stuff too. And so, it's easy for me to forget about that stuff on a day-to-day basis. But I think when we slow down and we just kind of, again, put ourselves in their shoes, remind ourselves of that. It's even a little text message or something like that can go a long way.
Right, yeah. And I think that's so great that knowing as a parent, all you need to do is acknowledge sometimes that as an adult, you don't need to give perfect advice or a great tip. You just need to acknowledge that they are feeling nervous or they are feeling excited. And if you can acknowledge that, then they're going to connect to you because they say, oh, Dad understands what I'm feeling right now. Yeah. And that, like you said, goes such a long way.
Well, I think something that if I were watching this, I would need to hear is that and sometimes you don't need advice. Sometimes you don't need the best tip. Sometimes that actually does less and more of a disservice to kiddo than, you might have the best advice and the best story and the best little tidbit to share there. But if that's all you do every day, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. So sometimes it's just a hug, right? Just say, hey, I know it's a big day. Good luck. That's all you need to say. And I think so often that takes pressure off parents to feel like they have to have the right answer and the right nugget of wisdom and the right thing to say. And you don't. You just need to acknowledge it and just, I think, be okay with the fact that that alone does a ton for your relationship with your kid.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially the older the kids get, the more they're like, oh, that's just dad or that's just mom, right? And they're going to kind of naturally want to separate anyway. So.
Absolutely.
And if there are kids watching, is there any specific advice you might give them, as they're going into this school year?
Yeah. So, full honesty on this. I come from a place as a parent where I have a kid who struggles at going to school. My oldest suffers from depression and anxiety, and her fourth grade year, she missed, nearly 20 plus days of school because she some mornings couldn't get out of bed. And so I say this with a little bit of perspective, and also a ton of humility. Not that I have any of this figured out, but if I were talking to my daughter right now or any student who's going into middle school or high school or even elementary school and you're stressed and you're anxious, I would say, number one, breathe. You got this. You might not have all the answers right now. You might not have it all figured out, but if you continue to put one foot in front of the other, take a deep breath and realize that you don't have to have everything perfect, you're going to be good. Number two, I would say, make sure that you have a perspective on what you're going into that is positive. A lot of times we look at going back into school and we think, it's going to be so tough. And, you think about all the negative. But what if you shifted that in your mind to more of an adventure rather than something that you have to fear, right? What if it was just a quick little mind shift on that of seeing these are going to be challenging opportunities or challenging things, but to see them more as opportunities rather than things that they have to fear. And I think if we can just make that subtle shift in our mind, I think that will help out a ton. And then the last thing I would say, and this is going to sound trite and it's going to sound, I think, probably cliche, but if I were to give advice to kids, I would say, dude, be kind to everyone. You have no idea what those little acts of kindness can do for people, and you have no idea how small little actions can really improve somebody's day. And so whether it's, the popular kid that everybody looks up to, or it's the kid that nobody even sees or talks to, be that person that shows kindness to every single one, that person that's in your building, including the teachers, including the substitutes, including the office staff, including the custodial staff. Be kind to everyone.
Awesome. Great 3 tips. And those are, I think, 3 tips that aren't only just good for entering the new school year, but good life tips that, as a kid, if you're practicing now, you're going to make it a long way. So,
yeah. I'll add on to that.
Yeah.
Say this, and this is coming from a parent, so if a kid's watching this, they might roll their eyes, but I can't emphasize the importance of sleep. And this thing of bringing your phone into your bedroom at night so that you don't miss the latest text, tweet, Facebook post, in Snapchat or whatever is such a detriment to your overall mental health and your physical health. When you're showing up at school and you have 4 hours of sleep because you just got done playing Fortnite until 5 in the morning or 3 in the morning or whatever, and you're supposed to function the next day and be kind and be present and be engaging, it's going to be really, really hard to do. So if I were to give one piece of tangible, practical advice for parents and for kids, it would be to keep all screens out of the bedroom.
Absolutely.
Replace them with an alarm clock, because that's the thing. That's my phone's my alarm. Okay. There's these things called alarm clocks. They're at Target. They're $7. Go get one. Keep the phone out of the room so you're not tempted, because what we know is that, when we get that buzz, ding, tweet, whatever it is on our phone, we can't help but want to know what that's all about or respond to it. It's a dopamine rush that we get. And just like, an addict for cigarettes or for gambling or any of that stuff, that same sort of feeling comes across in is what we or what kids feel too, or anybody who feels with technology. It's the same sort of chemicals that get released. And so by having the phone outside of the bedroom, it completely relieves that like feeling of I have to get back to that person right away. I have to check it, because you don't even see it and you don't even hear it. You don't even feel the buzz or whatever. It's gone. And so you don't have to worry about it as much. So
Yeah, that is something we talk to with parents as well. It's great advice, not only with what you mentioned, but also simply the Wi-Fi and the signals the phone is emitting actually affects our brain and our ability to go into a deep sleep. So, for example, at home, my wife and I, we even turn our Wi-Fi off every night. So the router's off, the phones are on airplane mode in another room, and it allows our nervous systems to relax more. So there too, if your child's struggling with some of that anxiety or stress, when they're by their phone, it's actually irritating the brain and the nervous system. So
yeah, it's really
advice.
interesting. I think we're going to look back 40 years from now with a lot more knowledge on what's going on with cell phones and all the things, and we're going to go, oh my gosh, really? We used to do this?
We used to have that next to our head all night long, right?
All night, 8 hours. And like, I think we're going to start seeing some of that stuff. Just like 40 years ago, when my mom had me at the hospital, she smoked a cigarette afterwards. And if a nurse would have come in and said, put that out, the nurse would have been the weirdo, right? I mean, 40 years, and we look back now and go, how crazy were people to smoke a cigarette in a hospital? And because we know so much more about it than we did 40 years ago. And I think there's going to be something to be, or there's something to be said about 40 years from now. What are they going to be saying about us? And I think it's going to be something to do with our screens and our phones. And they're going to go, man, if you only knew what we know now, you would have made some different answers. And I think exactly what you're talking about, that I can't remember what it's called. There's a phrase for it. It's not dirty technology or anything like that. But it's like exactly what the phrase is. But all that stuff that's happening from, a Wi-Fi standpoint, it's emitting that stuff. And we're taking,
it adds up and it stresses the body. So when you're trying to have these tools and strategies to de-stress, it's a huge one. As we're getting near the end today, I do want to mention one last thing. I know there's a video you had made just a couple weeks ago, and it's been super popular. It's at over 150,000 views. Almost 3,000 people have shared it. And it has 3 things that every child should be hearing, 3 phrases that every kid should hear. And I know as we're wrapping up here, we probably don't have time to go into all of it. We can certainly post it in the comments, so parents do have access to that. But can you give us a quick summary of those 3 phrases, Joe?
Yeah. So phrase number 1, love you. What do I mean by that? I mean, you're enough right here, right now. You don't need to earn it. You don't need someone else to tell you it. You're not enough because you get a lot of likes on an Instagram post or because you're the star athlete or the valedictorian. You're enough just because. And I think if we can grasp that concept, that almost like the analogy of like a sundae. We're the sundae, and the sundae is like good enough on its own, right? And all those little extra things are just toppings and whatnot that you put on a sundae. But at the end of the day, if you didn't have any of those extra toppings, any of those extra, stars on your letter jacket, or again, like posts or likes on an Instagram post, if you didn't have any of that, you'd still be pretty darn good on its own. And so I would say love you. Number 1, you are enough right now where you're at, and you don't need to earn it from other people. The second thing is push through. Life has this funny way of punching us in the mouth, right? And sometimes it happens early, sometimes it happens late, but unfortunately it's unavoidable. And when that happens, not if, but when that happens, we always have 2 questions. Why me? Or now what? And why me is a question that I think we ask a lot. And what that does is that it puts all the responsibility on other people. But now what kind of takes that sort of thing that happened and go, okay, yeah, maybe I did get bullied. Maybe I was the victim of a rumor that sort of ruined my reputation. Maybe I'm the victim of abuse in some way, shape, or form, or I've lost somebody close to me that I didn't expect to lose. Like, yes, we know these moments happen, and yes, they hurt, and yes, they're inconvenient, and yes, we would want them to go away if we could, but fortunately, we can't. And so now the question is, what do you do next? It's not the punch that defines who we are. It's what happens next. And
Because we're all going to get punched at some point, right? Life's not a smooth. It's exactly. So,
but when it
awesome.
happens,
What are you going to do?
Like, why me versus now what? And those who have that now what mentality are those that push through and make it to the other side. And like we said at the beginning of this, sometimes it's what's on the other side of that pain that will bring you the most joy. That you would have never gone through that door and to see that other side if you hadn't been punched in the mouth.
Exactly.
So continue to look for the opportunities. And then the third thing is just look up. And it goes back to this idea of we're addicted to our screens and our phones. And I think it's incredibly important that for students, that we find like quiet time where those go away and we look up and we notice and we see the other people around us. I was a senior in high school when I took a trip to the south side of Chicago and we did this mission trip. And for a week we did all this great work in schools, and like youth shelters and homeless shelters. And it was on the last night of the trip where we were celebrating all the work that we did. We took the subway into downtown Chicago, and then on the way back, we were taking it back to our shelter, and it was 8 seniors and a couple chaperones, and we're all just kind of messing around and laughing and talking, and the brakes squeal to a halt, the doors open up, and onto the car walks this homeless woman, and she sat down, and I don't know what and why and all of that, but she just started crying. And we all stood there not knowing what to do. Everyone's kind of looking down, right? And there was just this feeling that I got, like I gotta go do something. And without any plan or anything, I just went and I sat next to her. I put my arm around her, and she leaned into my chest, and she started weeping, like deep, like heavy cries. And about 3 minutes later, brakes stopped, the doors open up. It was this woman stopped. She gathered her stuff, and she walked off the train, and I've never seen her again.
Wow.
And I asked myself, like, would I have done that now in 2018? And my hope is, yeah, I would. As an adult, I would still have the courage to do that, but I don't actually think that's the right question. I don't think the question is, would I have done something? I think the question is, would I have even seen her in the first place?
Right.
And on my phone.
Because, right, you're looking down
and just looking down, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the problem when it comes to the phones. I don't think the phones in general are bad or inherently evil. I think some of the things that we miss when we're on our phones along the way is what, that's the tricky part.
I think that's
and
huge.
So just looking up and seeing the people in your building, because there's just so much hurt and so much pain and so much stuff that's going on in any kid's life on a day-to-day basis, that when you're looking up and you just make eye contact or talk to somebody or sit next to somebody different at lunch or have a conversation with somebody you would never have a conversation with, sometimes those little moments, they go so much further than you'll know, but you'll never get there if you're not looking up and seeing and looking for the opportunities where you can share that kindness. So
Absolutely.
Love you, push through, just look up.
Wonderful, Joe. Those are amazing. I appreciate it so much. And like I said, we'll put the video in below because it's a great video as well. So it has been awesome to connect today with you, sir. I really appreciate your time and your insights and your passion. And it's so fun because you have such great life experience to yield upon, not only for yourself, but your own kids and all the kids out there that you've already impacted and spoken to. So if you're a parent, as you've watched this, I know we went through a lot of content today as well. So I recommend just going back, watching it again, maybe pick one of the strategies that we talked about and practice that one for a bit. And then as you're feeling comfortable there, come back and, pick another one. And there's a lot of scenarios that can pop up. So the more practice you have, just keep pushing through, and your kids are going to do amazing this year. So yes. As we wrap up, Joe, we can put your details in the comments below as well. Any other ways people should get a hold of you specifically? If they do want to follow up with you more, they have more questions for you.
Yeah. So email is great.
Okay.
It's just joe@joebeckman.com.
Okay.
If they want to learn more about speaking events and the work that I do, they can go to my website, which is joebeckman.com. But if they want to follow on social media at all and see some of the stuff that I'm putting out, it's Joe_Beckman for most of the 99% of the social media sites out there.
Sweet.
Joe_Beckman.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a great resource for your kids too, because I know you put out little motivational videos or little clips that kids can be watching on the way to school and prep them for a great day. So
I try to be a positive voice
mm-hmm.
in the interweb sphere.
Yes. All right, Joe. Well, great to have you. Thank you again so much, and look forward to doing more with you in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. Take
All
care.
right. See you guys.